Today I want to talk about revisiting childhood dreams. Now, as I've grown older, I've encountered a lot of people who've encouraged me to revisit my childhood trauma, do shadow work, think about how my parents have influenced me, and think about all the ways they've created negative situations for me in my life. And quite frankly, I've always resisted doing any of that because I believe my parents did a fantastic job. And one of the things I'm starting to see is that a lot of my friends who go through this process of revisiting the childhood trauma need to also balance it out by revisiting the childhood magic and the dreams and the incredible experiences. And I totally accept that there are some people who truly have traumatic childhoods, that they have parents who were fundamentally, physically, mentally, and even sexually abusive. But the vast majority of people, I would argue, did not have that. I think what they had were parents who were doing their best and childhoods that on the whole were free from physical violence and existences that did not involve starvation or drought. And this isn't to say that there aren't skeletons to dig up or negatives to analyse or problems to look over. But I do wonder if this kind of mimetic desire to dig up all of the problems with your parents instead of focusing on the magic of your childhood could lead to people seeing themselves through an entirely kind of negative lens. Right now I'm in the Lake District and I'm revisiting a place that my parents took me a few times on holidays. And at the time I couldn't really take in how beautiful the place was because I was so focused on wanting to be on a screen or wanting to do something else other than hiking or wanting to be out of the rain. Now with the benefit of a little bit of age, I realise this is just an absolute wonderland of lush nature, very reasonable temperatures, beautiful hiking, and just an incredible place to be. And in many ways it feels like I'm revisiting a childhood dream, but appreciating it at much higher resolution, because now I'm not complaining about not being on a screen. I'm enjoying nature and being in streams and really taking in the whole environment. And I recognise that relative to many of my friends, I think my parents have done a pretty fantastic job, and that's a very lucky position to be in. But I also see that if I was to spend too much time kind of focusing on where they erred or where they weren't perfect, that would drag my mind into a kind of quagmire of pain, instead of thinking, broadly speaking, they are doing their best. And quite frankly, almost all of my friends who've described some of their childhood trauma or parental problems, I would say that those things are challenging, but they're not damning. By that I mean they may have left scabs, but I don't think they've really left scars. They may have kind of caused abrasions on the soul, but not completely torn it to shreds. Now, by way of contrast, I have met people where their parents or their families or their people around them would kind of meet that standard. People who've been subject to kind of inner family rapes, and people who have been subject to extraordinary kind of personal abuse, and more tragically and less kind of culpably in terms of the parents, I've met a lot of people in America whose parents were destroyed by the 2008 financial crisis and their marriages fell apart. And in those instances, I wouldn't even say that the parents were to blame, but just the situations were to blame. And in all of these cases, I think that all of those things are extremely bad and may kind of, I would boundary this video and say this is not general advice, but for the general upbringing, that is some challenges and some positives, and at the end of the day, a life existing. I get this sense that just viewing your childhood through the lens of shadow work risks ruining what was so magical about it, where you didn't have to worry about feeding yourself. you didn't have to worry about a schedule. You didn't have to worry about scores. You didn't have to worry about debts. You didn't have to worry about likes. You didn't have to worry about this third person perception of yourself online. And you could just be, you could play, you could meet your friends, you could eat, you could sleep, you could nap, you could drink, you could do any of these things. And this whole world was unfolding for you in this kind of natural way. And this was provided to you by extremely hardworking parents and people who were trying to kind of insulate you from the realities of life, which are the taxes, the wages, the work, the numbers, the schedule, the stress, the alarm clock, all these things. In many ways, your whole existence was a kind of flow state of arriving at the next moment without having to think in the future because somebody was thinking for you. And that is kind of the dreamlike state of childhood. I've been joking that when you get your SAT scores, childhood ends. Or when you begin kind of entering things in a calendar, that's truly when you can't consider yourself to be a young adult anymore. And when when more of your life is spent on Zoom calls than adventures, that really is the beginning of adult life today. And that's quite sad. And so in many ways, as I kind of tour around the UK and go back to all the places I went to before I was 15, I feel like I'm revisiting childhood dreams, not dwelling on childhood nightmares. And I do believe that everybody has a different proportion of dreams and nightmares in their past, and I can understand why this concept of shadow work has become so popular. But I would also say that everyone I know who's become a young parent seems to view their parents very differently because they start to understand that it is often not deliberate what the parents are doing, it is the result of the life they are living that has an effect on the child. I'm not sure I'm really making a particularly profound point here, other than to kind of drill home a single message, which is I'm trying to bring my mind back to places of magic in the present. And part of that is locating myself physically in places where I know I had a very free-flowing childhood. And going back to, some would say it's revisiting my past, but I think a better way of describing the sensation of it is physically traveling to places where I know I was in flow or in a kind of playful place, and just seeing what happens when I'm there and seeing what arises. And so I'd be really curious to hear from you if anyone ends up checking out the comments and replying. What are some of your childhood dreams? What are some of the childhood magic? For me, a lot of it is to do with the ocean and kite surfing and riding with my dad. And then with my mum, it's about discussing design and wandering through her garden and eating the food that she cooks. And then the physical locations are kind of the perimeter of a lot of the UK, and many of the lakes and the places that are windiest and the oceans and the beaches. Those are all places where I know I've had childhood dreams and magical times. And just physically driving back to those places and being in them is, in the present moment, bringing up just a lot of really positive ideas and positive perspectives. I would say most of the nightmares, to the extent, were not induced by my parents, but were the result of being in a kind of boys' school, which was extremely competitive, where it wasn't cool to be dumb, and where I was surrounded by a lot of people who are a lot more intelligent than me. And that environment definitely challenged me. So in that way, I don't want to kind of drive into my past again and kind of lay it all out on YouTube for you, but just to say that this tour, this kind of childhood dream tour of the UK has been very helpful for me, and it's something I just wanted to share in a positive frame of mind, and maybe you find it interesting. Cheers.